So, armed with the ESSA evidence standards, RAND reviewed the evidence on interventions designed to improve school leadership. We looked at 6 types of interventions, and we developed these categories to cover the real estate, to cover all types of interventions. So if you feel like there's one that you're considering that's not in that list, I'd love to talk about it and make sure that we're being responsive. So we looked at leader evaluation systems. So those are tools, processes, rubrics to evaluate school principals and or assistant principals. And those may be used for accountability purposes. They may also be used for support purposes to help identify and develop a school leader. We looked at pre-service preparation and internships. We were agnostic about who offered it. It could be a university, it could be a district-based program, it could be an alternative provider, but we were looking for preparation programs that would lead to a degree or certification that would lead somebody along the path towards becoming a principal. We looked at strategic staff management. That's recruitment, retention, placement, replacement of principals. So we looked at those as strategic staff management of the principals themselves, not what the principal does to manage their staff. So that was another category. Professional learning is another category of principal initiatives, and that is probably the biggest category. It includes all professional development. It could be workshops, it could be conferences, it could be mentoring, it could be coaching, and there's a lot more movement towards mentoring and coaching now, and so that was a particular interest to us. Another type of principal initiative is working conditions. What about the climate, the conditions in which the principal works shapes what they're able to accomplish? Is it incentives to motivate them to try new things? Is it more autonomy at the school to remove some of the barriers so that the principal can have more opportunities to shape the way the school operates? So we looked at a number of different kinds of working conditions, and then finally the school reform models, as I mentioned before, especially funded under Title I, comprehensive models that have a leadership focus. There are a lot of comprehensive models out there. There are not a lot that actually really focus in on leadership, and that was a requirement that they needed to have leadership at the center of one of only 4 or 5 different key components. So we feature here, with one exception, only interventions that had some level of evidence, tiers 1 through 4. So we reviewed a huge number of interventions that are not featured here, but did not yet have a strong evidence base, so we couldn't highlight them. We were not the What Works Clearinghouse. So we looked at leader evaluation systems and found 2 leader evaluation systems that are widely used and that have strong rationales that are supported by evidence. So Marzano and the Vanderbilt Assessment of Leadership in Education, VALED. We also found in principal preparation programs several branded programs that have evidence of impact. So New Leaders has Tier 2 evidence showing positive outcomes, and the Texas Principal Excellence Program also has Tier 2 evidence. The Tier 2 evidence for Texas did not show a significant relationship between the program and student outcomes after 1 year, but did show a significant improvement on some of the principal competencies. And that's where you get into some of the challenges of looking at the evidence on principals. All the impact, all the research supports the finding that the impact of principals on student achievement is not direct, it's indirect. It's channeled through teachers, it's channeled through instruction. It's an intuitive finding, but it's also supported by the research. So it may be channeled through school climate. You are really unlikely to see the principal change student achievement in 1 year, because first the principal needs to change the climate of the school, they need to change the instruction, they need to change the goals. There are a lot of things that the principal does have an impact on, can have an impact on, that will have impact on student achievement. So when looking at research, if you're looking at new studies, be cognizant that you might need to look at a step back from student achievement if you have a study that's pretty short. Strategic staff management, that is the one where we did include it in the table because there's been a lot of policy push to replace principals, as I said before, and we just wanted to note that we did a pretty exhaustive look and did not find any rigorous evidence that met ESSA standards, that principal replacement actually would improve student achievement or other outcomes. So that doesn't mean it doesn't, it just means that there's not a lot of evidence supporting that. So I just wanted to note that. In terms of professional learning, the evidence on McCrell's Balanced Leadership Program was mixed. It did find a reduction in staff turnover, which is generally a good sign, and it is based on a strong research model. And also we looked at NISL, the National Institute for School Leadership, and there is statistically significant achievement gains according to several Tier 2 studies, so that is a strong contender according to ESSA standards. Under working conditions, what we had mostly was strong theories of action, strong logic models. We did find some research on principal autonomy that had mixed results, and it tended to look like the results were mixed due to challenges in implementation, which may or may not be part of what's happening with principal replacement. And then finally, the school improvement models. The Knowledge is Power program, KIPP, has strong evidence, tiers 1, 2, and 3, as well as a good rationale, good logic model to support it having an impact on student achievement. And UVA's school turnaround program also had tier 2 evidence showing effects that would qualify, that meets ESSA standards. So this is a document that came out of the same project where we recognized that a lot of school leadership improvement efforts have solid evidence that meets tiers 1 through 3, but some of them do not. So how do you know that this is likely to help your leaders? Is it likely to make a difference? Well, if you turn to tier 4, they require a logic model to show the connections. So even if you don't have evidence that your intervention has an impact, and if you're not ready to evaluate whether your intervention affects student achievement, you certainly want to have a good idea of how it operates so that you are alert and aware and looking for evidence that is going in the right direction. So according to ESSA, the minimum standard for an evidence-based intervention is that the intervention should be represented by a logic model, by rationale, which is defined in the non-regulatory guidance as presents a well-specified conceptual framework that identifies key components of the proposed process or strategy. So what are the key elements of it? And describes the relationship among the key elements and the relationship between the key elements and outcomes. That's your logic model. And it's useful in several ways, especially at this stage where there's not strong tiers 1 through 3 evidence. To maximize the impact of education interventions, education policy makers might want to have a clear vision of how the investment is expected to lead to better student outcomes. What are the steps that it takes to get to student outcomes so that you can see if you are on that path? So state and district education policymakers, and also, although I don't think any of you are those folks, people who are designing interventions and people who are implementing the interventions can use logic models to understand the theory behind the ways in which the intervention works, to identify the key components and to be able to track whether those components are happening as you would hope they would happen, and then to evaluate. So before you get to the point of evaluating your intervention, having a good idea of how that intervention should flow towards outcomes so that you could see if you are on that path and then get to the point where ultimately, in several years, you might be ready to do an evaluation that meets tiers 1 through 3. And that is one of the requirements of tier 4, is that there needs to be some evaluation at some point going on to build that evidence base towards tiers 1 through 3. So to develop this, I'm going to talk a little bit about where the information comes from, because I think that helps equip you to know how much you should trust that information. To develop this, we started with the programs that were in the report that we had just been discussing. All those that were featured we included, but that was not enough, because we wanted to have logic models that showed different types of leader evaluation systems. For example, we think there's a very big difference, or principal preparation, that's my go-to example, sorry. But for principal preparation programs, we think that the logic model might look a little bit different if the program is offered by a university, or it's offered by a district, or it's offered by an alternate provider. And so we wanted to make sure that we were looking at a couple of examples for every key type within each of these categories. So we did go to other reviews that have followed this review to look for their logic models, or if they did not have one, to develop out a logic model that would allow us to, from their written materials. We also consulted with our panel of experts, both internal and external to RAND, to identify other models that we should include in this review. We don't name the models that are included in this review because it's not an evaluation of them in particular, it's just an evaluation of the various paths that one can use to get from a program to an outcome. We did not include all school improvement programs that are out there. We just wanted to show enough variation to be able to accurately capture a path from program to outcomes. You can see the elements that are in the logic models we put there. The problem statement, what is the issue you're addressing, the resources that would influence, that would affect the activities and how they roll out, the outputs, what happens immediately, and then the outcomes, the end goals. It's important to start first with what do you want to accomplish, rather than this is a neat intervention or this is one that I've heard is effective. First, what is it effective for? What do you want to get done? And then to start looking for the interventions that meet that. Starting from outcomes, in order to solve your problem, what do you want to see? And then working backwards to resources. So when you're talking about improving school leadership, you can be looking down the whole pipeline, and you might, as a state, be thinking, what are we doing to improve preparation? What are we doing to improve placement? What are we doing to improve professional development? What are we doing to improve evaluation? What are we doing there? And in all of these different areas. And so how do you think through all of that? And I think you all said, well, you need one model that brings it all together. And yes, you do need one model that brings it all together so that you have a coherent pipeline. Or maybe even if you're just talking within say, professional development, a coherent set of initiatives that work together and that are complementary. But you also might want to think about whether you need logic models for each piece to be able to unpack each of those pieces and provide guidelines on how that's being implemented and is that piece performing as you had expected it to. So that's what we suggest. There's no right or wrong way here, but just to suggest that it's a very complex landscape and to think about how are you going to handle the coherence as well as the detail. And then, of course, to adjust your model as needed, because reality never ever reflects what you had intended exactly. These are the outcomes that are commonly targeted by school leadership improvement interventions. And what we found was when we looked across all 6 types of interventions that they tended to have common types of outcomes. So we only really unpacked the outcomes once. We didn't unpack it for each type of intervention. But we did look at long, medium, and short-term outcomes. And you may see that when you get into certain kinds of interventions that the short-term outcomes may differ, but ultimately you sort of want to end up at the place that you're improving student-level outcomes. So the long-term outcomes tend to be, from the models that we reviewed, tended to be at the student level. What were your students accomplishing at the end of this intervention? As I said before, it takes a very long time to get from principal to student, and so a lot of the evidence focuses on medium-term outcomes. Has there been a change in the school? Has there been change in instruction? Has there been change in climate? Has there been a change in the classroom? Has there been a change in staff? So that's what seemed to be common across the interventions. And then the short-term outcomes tended to be what has changed in terms of the principal's capacity, their ability, and they're actually using these skill sets to set direction, vision, and goals, to adapt to school needs, to use data to drive practice. So this is a set of capacities that have been linked with medium and long-term outcomes. And so in your short term, some subset of this may be what you are hoping your intervention would accomplish. I think the best of the best, they're doing performance-based evaluations. So there may be like a task that principals do, and they may do that in their, say, in the hiring process or in the entry to a preparation program or as a result, but they'll be doing something that's a performance-based task, like an in-basket task. You know, how do you handle a lot of pressure and having to make decisions quickly? Or like an interacting with a teacher task. You know, how do you deliver a hard evaluation in a way that's constructive, or how do you receive a hard evaluation in a way that's constructive? So performance-based tasks, that's the best of the best. As with outcomes, we found that resources was hard to talk about type of model by type of model, but for a different reason. There were very few descriptions of interventions that talked very coherently about the resources you need. So instead of summarizing what the documentation showed about the resources that were used in each of these models, instead what we did was we identified key questions that you would want to ask to see whether you have the resources to implement this kind of intervention. So key questions basically are, what do you need to implement the intervention, and are those resources available? Thinking about different kinds of resources. Money's important, but it's definitely not the only thing. In fact, people far and above seems to matter quite a bit. Facilities, funding, materials, and data. Those are all types of resources. But I wanted to now walk through one example of principal preparation programs. I selected that because my head is very much in principal preparation programs right at the moment, and that it is a very good example, I think. So you'll see we've already talked about the outcomes, the green box at the end. We've already talked about resources, the orange box at the beginning. So let's start with the problem statement, and I'm just going to walk you through what this looks like before asking you to think about your own context. So let's start with the problem statement, and the problem statement for principal preparation programs, and this is the one we wrote, you may write a different one yourself, is really focusing on, there are principal preparation programs out there. It's not a question of whether there are programs, it's a question of the programs producing the kind of principals that you want to see in your schools, and maybe even especially in low-performing schools. So many states and districts struggle with a shortage of new principals who possess the competencies needed for effective leadership. So the training programs do not always give the academic coursework and clinical experiences that really prepare principals for the principalship today. Principalship has evolved quite a bit, and not all programs have evolved with the changes in the role. In addition, after graduation, new principals don't always receive the support they need to be able to implement what they learned in the program in the real-world context. That's the problem, is that there are some principal preparation programs that have not yet evolved to prepare principals for the job as it is today and have to provide support for principals as they start down that path. The middle two columns of the logic model talk about activities and output. So let's start with activities, and here's a little key. The circles mean that in all of the information we reviewed for all of the programs, they all said this was important. And the little triangles and the italics mean some of them, more than one, less than all, said that this was important. And the arrows there show you that in some cases it's sequential. These things happen in a certain order. Sometimes they weren't sequential. They could all happen concurrently, and so we didn't put arrows in there. So there are these sets of activities that were common to principal preparation programs, and you would put these in your logic model or some version of these, and it may not be these exactly, but this is a starting point for you to think. There's all of the programs we reviewed indicated that they developed or selected research-based standards and curricula for preparing effective principals. They all had that standards at the beginning. It may be your state standards for principals, it may be your state standards for principal preparation programs, it may be NELP, it may be some other national level standard, but they had started with that point of standards and then a curriculum that helped realize those standards. Then programs turned to recruiting and selecting highly qualified principal candidates. Real big shift. So in this logic model, this is not what people do now. This is what you hope your effective program will do. So a lot of programs take all comers, and a lot of programs enroll teachers who want to get an advanced degree because that increases their salary. But they're maybe not going in the direction of becoming an effective principal. So changing that take-all-comers approach to recruiting and selecting highly qualified individuals who are directed towards becoming principals, that is something that appeared in some of the programs as part of their thinking, part of their logic model. Providing them with adequate training that includes coursework, academic instruction, and clinical learning opportunities. So that's a big, big bucket. Sure, coursework, not a given that they'll have clinical opportunities, and more research suggests that that's important, and the programs all included that as part of what they were thinking, that there should be clinical opportunities. There are online programs that do not offer that kind of clinical work, but there's a lot of research evidence, and the better programs do offer some kind of clinical work. Placing graduates in leadership positions, not all programs that we looked at did that, but some of them did, actively engaged in the placement process, and then providing them with constructive feedback and support after they've achieved that position. Not all programs do that, but of the programs we reviewed, that was a common approach. So those are the activities that would form the core of what your intervention is in your logic model. We also provided some detail to unpack those activities, again drawing on the programs that we had reviewed. For example, in recruiting and selecting highly qualified principal candidates, these are in italics, so these are two things that are common, but not in all of the programs that we looked at. Many of the university district partnerships involve the district in outreach, recruitment, and selection. So rather than the teacher saying, I want to be a principal, I'm going to sign up for a program, will you write my recommendation? The districts helped identify the highest quality candidates and ensure that they were put into that pipeline and connected with the programs. And some programs used a centralized process with selection criteria. Some programs might have a selection day or some other activity to choose the most highly qualified candidates from the pool. So those are some of the details that are part of the activities. So there are those kinds of details for all of the activities. And then turning to outputs. The outputs they're not your outcomes. They are what you expect to happen immediately as a result of your having implemented these activities. How do you hope that the program will touch the principals? Like principal preparation program standards and structures are research-based and are aligned. That was your goal. You developed activities with that intent, and when you look at them, do they look that way? Are they aligned with standards, and are they research-based? So it's a very traditional logic model design. But what we tried to do was pull information from all of these programs and from a variety of programs to be able to say, here are some important things to be thinking about as you're putting together a logic model, as you're looking at your own program and thinking, how does it flow from program to outcomes? But I think having a big picture like this that says, here's the big picture of what we're trying to accomplish and how we're going to get there, helps you maintain your direction when you're faced with the day-to-day hammering of no funding, changes in legislation, changes in personnel.